Step on up, sit down, twist off that bottle top or crack open that can, and welcome to Porch Matters. This is Terry Cagle coming to you from my back porch. Yes sir, yes ma'am, the name of this show is authentic. On Porch Matters, our saying is this: big issues or just a friendly conversation. No topic is off limits. We take pride in being able to talk about anything with each other in an open discussion. Open discussion is one of the only ways to learn. Your perspective could be changed. You could change the perspective of others. Friends and family, welcome back to another episode of Porch Matters. I'm glad you're here. I'm sitting out here watching my cousin Hunter do his best impersonation of Pistol Pete or Allen Iverson dribbling the basketball on the road here by the house. I do have to say, kid's getting pretty good with the ball. I just enjoyed a nice bowl of SpaghettiOs with meatballs. Yes, I'm a 39-year-old man that still enjoys SpaghettiOs. Don't you judge me. I'm sure you do too. Speaking of things I enjoyed, I watched the new Fast and Furious movie. Rented it off of Amazon Prime. Thought it was a very good movie. Much better than Black Widow in my opinion. This franchise has kind of went the route of James Bond. Meaning, just when you think they can't top some of the stunts, they do. I won't give away any spoilers, but it's a continuation of Fast 8's story, and they expand a bit on Dom's backstory. If you like the franchise, definitely go out of your way to watch it. I got to go to the Williams family reunion today. We didn't get to have it last year because of COVID. It was nice to be able to see some family I hadn't seen in a couple of years. Eat some homemade food while having some good conversation. Speaking of a good conversation, on this episode I am joined by my friend Lindsey Rowland. She is a veteran, a lobbyist for veterans, and the host of the Carry On podcast. Hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. Without further ado, let's get started. Lindsey Rowland, welcome to the porch, ma'am. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me today. I'm excited to be here.
How's life?
Oh, well, it's hot. We're obviously in the middle of summer. DC's opening up a little bit now with the COVID restrictions relaxed. The mayor's office just went back to work, and the feds are still kind of coming in and out of, working and not working. So, DC's starting to open up a little bit, and that's, obviously a change from the past year and a half.
Took them long enough.
It did. The fence came down around the Capitol finally last week. Like, holy shit. So
that was ridiculous. I'm sorry, but that was ridiculous.
Absolutely ridiculous. And as you know, there's been really no visitors allowed inside the Capitol or the congressional offices unless you're invited. And a staffer picks you up outside and escorts you in. So I'm hoping eventually, like with we'll call it the wall coming down last week, that hopefully they'll start letting constituents come back into the offices, and that should help DC open back up again.
For a bunch that loves to talk about how walls are so negative, they sure were quick to put one up, wouldn't they? And I'm not condoning or anything on what happened on January 6th. Not doing
me neither.
Making that public. I'm just saying they took something like that and have just totally went way too far with it. Don't ever let a good crisis go to waste. Isn't that the saying?
That's a good one, actually. I like that.
Right.
And they really utilize that one to the best of their ability. So
it's crazy.
Yeah. So now we're going to spend even more money on another committee trying to figure out what happened. Well, I think we know what happened. So we'll see what happens with that.
Oh yeah, we do. We definitely know what happened.
Yeah.
Between all the alleged election fraud and everything else, that litigation's still going on with that to this day. Even if they do find out that there was election fraud, what are they going to do? Kick him out of office? No.
I don't know. I mean, it's just too entertaining right now. We got to keep him in for a little while so we can at least have a good laugh.
Not going to lie, whenever I seen him trip going up the steps on Air Force One, I did chuckle a little bit.
I mean, I was trying to decide if that was real or if somebody just did some video behind it, but I didn't really care.
In all honesty, you can't tell anymore. if it's real.
No, you can't tell.
But that looked real to me.
We'll call it real.
I'm not a QAnon supporter or anything like that. I don't know Q personally.
I don't think anyone does. So
that was my terrible attempt at a QAnon joke. Off the top of our heads here, how is life in DC? I've actually never been there.
Well, I've been living here about 4 years now. So I started out working on the Hill in a fellowship at a congressional office. And then I also did some waiting tables on the side just to meet people. But DC is different. You have like your staffers, and then you have your senior staffers, and then the political scene. I mean, I just like it because I love politics. I love legislation. And for me, it's like the hub of where I want to be at. Like I knew when I left the military that I wanted to live in DC. And so I moved here. But yeah, over the 4 years, even with COVID last year, it's been different last year, but it's an exciting place to be. There's always something going on, and people are out and about. And I just enjoy being here because I feel like we're straight. And before COVID, you could walk into any hearing. Most hearings are public, and if you're interested in a topic, you can go sit in a hearing and listen to it. It's just really cool to be there. And a lot of people, we think very negatively about our congressional representatives, but I will tell you that just being here has really changed my thinking on that. I see our congressional delegates working very hard on bills and working hard for the people. And so I think it kind of gave me a renewed, fresh sense that I do think they care. And I do lobbying. And then when you reach out to offices, they do respond and they do want to hear what you have to say, especially I work in military and veteran issues. And so so to answer your question, to me, DC is the hub of where it's at. And even with it being dead the last year, Congress was still working and they were still passing bills and there were still things going on here. So to me, it's like, it's my crack. It's exciting.
Well, since you brought that up, I've heard Tulsi Gabbard, if my memory serves me correctly, on Joe Rogan, basically compare Congress to high school. You've been around some of those congressmen and women. Can you personally describe for the listeners what it's like to be around any of the congressional leaders and how the process works for what you do?
I mean, as far as being around them, they all have their intricate personalities. I definitely have like my list of favorites. I would say like Dan Crenshaw. I like Tulsi Gabbard too. I believe she's a veteran.
She is.
But yeah, she's done a lot of good things. I like Dan Crenshaw. I like Matt Gaetz. He's going through a little bit of a scandal right now, but I think he will overcome that. I like Mike Gallagher. He's a Marine Corps veteran. And yeah, they all have their personalities. And so it's kind of fun to watch. Even on the House Veterans Affairs Committee or the Senate Veteran Committee, there's just, there's a lot of people like in the right places that seem to know the real world or know what goes on in the veteran community. And I feel like as much as like we say that they don't know what's going on, that they actually do, and they're very much in touch, and they want to pass legislation that's helpful and not mandated from somebody on the Hill that has no idea what's going on, like down on the ground, especially when you're talking about like armed services. But I you enjoy some of them that have their own personalities, and there's a lot of new freshmen that do have their own personalities as well. So it's just always interesting to follow them.
If you'll notice, folks, the congressmen and women that she mentioned had one thing in common. They had a military background. Our guest also has a military background. Could you please tell us a little bit about your military background?
Yeah, so I went to school I went to college. I commissioned as an officer. I became a logistics officer, and I served almost right away. Was stationed in Germany. Went almost within like the first year and a half. I was on my first deployment to Iraq. It was during the surge, 2006 timeframe. So I did 15 months there, and then came back. And then went back with another unit about a year later, did another year, came back, moved to Porch, New York, 10th Mountain Division, spent some amazing years there. And then I got picked up around like my 8th year. I got picked up for Foreign Area Officer for Germany, which I was really excited about. Did that for a while. My career was cut short at the 10-year mark because I do suffer from PTSD from some of my combat tours. So I was medically retired. I would have liked to have stayed in the full 20 years. I would have been working at embassies and being trained as an army attaché. And that was like my dream. So I've had to like regroup. I've been out for 5 years now. So I've had to regroup and like relearn what my dreams are again. Because when you have your dream and then it's taken away from you, you know, you can imagine like what that's like, hitting rock bottom. And then you're like, okay, but I still have all of these things. I have all this leadership experience. I have this deployment. I have all of these things, all this education. So it's taken me a while to get my stuff together again, but I've found that working on the Hill has kind of brought back that passion again. And I kind of feel, you know, the feeling you just kind of know you're in the right spot. You're not sure what it is, but you just know that you're excited again about things.
Yes.
And so I may never be an army attaché, but I'm jealous of you. But, you know, I'm also able to do things with legislation that, as you can see, your listeners can't see my face, but like I'm glowing, like I love it. It's just really inspiring. And I think it's a good fit for me. So long story short, yeah. So I love my military time, but yeah, life just doesn't always work out like you think it's going to.
No, sometimes your best laid plans, just like you said, get taken away. You got to back up and figure something else out. So, hey, thank you very much for your service then and now. So,
Thank you.
What, with your military background and what you're doing now, as far as lobbying goes, on top of all of that, folks, she is also a fellow podcaster. She has a podcast called the Carry On Podcast, which is a very good podcast. I have been listening to it. It's very good. I strongly suggest that everybody listening right now go subscribe, download, and listen. You'll definitely be educated as to different things that are going on. Any kind of good cases that you got going on right now that you would like to share with the listeners? I've heard some, but I'm going to let you tell.
Well, so for one, let me just put out there that I would like to call my podcast unique in the sense that it is Republican. I'm a Republican. And I think that if you look at some of my competitors, it is different because I bring a Republican view to things. And I think that's important in our day and age right now because we hear so much mainstream media that's very liberal. One case I am working on is, we'll go back to 6 January again. I was really, and I'll say, like what you said, I did not support what happened on 6 January, but here we are. And I was really upset how the media picked up, and other fellow veterans picked up the story that there were so many veterans that were extremists. Mm-hmm. You know, this extremist, like veterans are extremists, and it kind of, you know, trickled down to like Sec Def Austin doing extremist stand downs in the military. And you're just like, okay, but let's take a look at it. Like, do we really know they were extremists? They haven't been charged yet, or they've been charged, but they haven't been convicted of anything. So I have a story. I did a story on, I'm sure you're familiar with the QAnon shaman.
Yes.
So he just happens to be a Navy veteran. So I've been following his story. His lawyer is amazing, Albert Watkins. So I have a podcast with him tomorrow. I already did a podcast with him before talking about the legal circumstances surrounding John's case, because he's actually being held in solitary confinement right now in the DC jail. So still they will not release him. Yeah. So tomorrow I have another podcast as an update with Albert, just to talk about, there's a little bit of I've noticed there's a little bit of a campaign online saying release the political prisoners from 6 January, which, you know, there's, I would say that there is some truth to that, them being political prisoners. So tomorrow we'll talk to Albert. He only gives me like 30 minutes per podcast, so I have to get the most out of him. And he's fascinating and he loves to talk and he's funny. And so you just got to catch Albert, like just right or left, and like just make sure you have the right questions for him. And he'll give us an update on what's going on with his client. But it's very interesting. And actually, come to find out, like side notes, just cut me off if you want to. But so the QAnon shaman, apparently, according to his lawyer, that was a name made up by the media. So like it wasn't a name that he gave himself. And so according to his lawyer, he does not have any QAnon connections. Now, I just report the story to my listeners on these cases. As far as like other cases I go into, we talk details, but this is just, I report the story from the person I'm interviewing to you, and you can make up your mind about it. But at least I'm giving you another view of the story from a different lens. And then I don't care if you agree with me or agree with, with Mr. Watkins. It's just a matter of like letting you hear, like, I think it's very interesting to hear from their lawyers. What are they fighting? What are they up against? Why is it a year later? Or not a year yet, but it will be a year by the time the trial starts. So yeah, so that's tomorrow. So that's always exciting to kind of stir the pot. And then I have like fellow veterans who are like, how dare you support these veterans? And I'm like, how dare you not? Like, how dare you not, like, support veterans? And we get a bad rep enough that we don't need liberals out there screaming that veterans are extremists with guns. So
why would they ask, why are you supporting veterans?
They're asking why I'm supporting veterans that were involved in the insurrection. And I'm like, well, I'm not necessarily supporting the veterans. I'm telling you the story from their perspective, which would be, in these cases, their lawyer is their mouthpiece, because QAnon Shaman's currently in jail. But yeah, I know why are you supporting them? And I'm like, I'm not supporting what they did, and I'm not supporting that 6th January, but I'm supporting the fact that I'm going to give them a chance for their story to be told.
Nobody knows the full story of what happened there. Nobody. Between alleged suppression, I know I've seen 2 or 3 TikTok videos before they were taken down of security personnel and everything actually moving barricades out of the way and letting people come in.
Mm-hmm.
From a corrections officer standpoint, no, you do not do that. It's all about containment and control. You don't do that. I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know if they were told to do it. And I'm not trying to put a tinfoil hat on here. I'm just being reasonable. Okay. And a lot of that stuff, my personal opinion, came from 4 to 5 years, counting the campaign and everything, of the President of the United States being totally ridiculed about every single thing. On top of that, different rhetoric being thrown out there between the mainstream news and all of your cable outlets, trying to push this agenda, that agenda, and everybody just getting hit over the head with everything. On top of that, the whole COVID thing, which made things worse. Then you started having all of this other stuff break out. Well, that just, as far as the deal in Seattle where they took over several blocks, all of this escalation coming about. And then it appears that our election was stolen because of alleged fraudulent stuff, even though if you go and look at other sources, they basically told you what they were going to do months before they allegedly done it. Was it rigged? Kind of looked like it to me, but I can't prove it. I don't have the evidence. You see what I'm saying here? All of that was just a buildup of everything that the alleged left stirred up. You push people into a corner and back them up into a corner where they feel like they don't have any hope. Most people that's got a backbone's going to go down swinging, right?
No, I totally agree. I think that's a very valid point. It was a buildup over time. I mean, Trump couldn't do anything right. Even, working on a case with the VA, how the Democrats came after Secretary Wilkie. He was one of the few secretaries that was not, hit real hard by the ridicule, because I think probably because the VA is more bipartisan. But yeah, like Trump couldn't do anything right in the media, and no matter what, there was just never any, like, he was never getting, as followers and as supporters, even if you're not a full Trump supporter, you still, like, there's just never a break. And so yeah, I think that even my parents are like Trump supporters, and like they were fired up, like, to have like 7-year-old people just like super fired up, I mean, yeah, I agree with you. It was just perpetuated over years and years. And then even now today, we still have to hear about it.
Yeah. And it just seems like anybody that doesn't agree with some people's agenda, now since January 6th, the word extremist is turning into just a big political thing. You're either a racist or you're an extremist now.
Mm-hmm. Or a patriot, which is basically the same thing, according to them. And we know it's not, but yes.
It's one of the things that I started this podcast about. I don't have to agree with everything that somebody else tells me. I don't have to believe or agree with anything anybody else does. But I am an adult, and I was taught that it's okay to have differences of opinions as long as you have mutual respect for one another. I've heard Michael Savage talk about, and I'm not totally against the Democratic Party. I'm not.
Me neither, actually. I kind of like some
I'm,
of the things that come
yeah,
out of them.
I vote Republican, but I view myself as a libertarian. I am a registered Democrat.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I really am.
Interesting.
My granddad was actually in the Democratic Party on the local level. Just basically to keep him happy, I registered as a Democrat. Full
You better
honesty.
change that. No,
Yeah,
I'm just teasing.
I am.
I'm teasing.
Well, I am actually. But to go on with it, he was always one that went in on voting day. Didn't matter who was running, Democrat. He pulled the lever, walked right out. Or later on, filled in the Democratic Party. Didn't, like I said, didn't matter who. My dad's father was the exact same way, but for Republican. Didn't matter who was running. His brother could have been running on the Democratic side. He was going to vote for the Republican. That's not the way I was raised. You vote for the person, not the party. You actually try to do your research, find out about the person, find out what they're for, what they're against, and then if it matches what you are for or against, you vote for that person based off of that. This whole party alliance thing just drives me crazy. But at the same time, you've been pushed to that.
That's what I was just gonna say. It's sort of come down to the fact where like you have to pick you can't toe the line. You have to pick a side.
I thoroughly agree with Bongino when he said, at this point, you've got to pick a side.
You do.
But at the same time, I heard Savage say this, Michael Savage, and I've said it on this podcast before. A bird can't fly straight unless it has a left wing and a right wing. Very simple, but very profound. With just one wing, it's just going to sit there and do circles if it flies at all. So, I mean,
I like that.
People need to come together. I've said this on that show 1,000 times, it seems like. I hadn't really, but it just seems like it. We've got to come together. A lot of people view the same or wanting the same things. What do we want? We want to be safe. We want to have the opportunity to make as much money and everything as we can. We want to have good insurance for our families. We want to be able to put food on our table. And we also want to have something to where our kids can be better off when we're gone, right?
And I would add to that, we kind of just want to be left alone.
Yes, we do. So
I think that's important. Left alone to do those things that you're talking about and not be dictated of how we're going to do those things.
Right. What does the Declaration of Independence say? I'd say that the Declaration of Independence or the Bill of Rights that says for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And they didn't tell us how to do the pursuit of happiness. There's no lesson plan or there's no instruction. You know, that is the goal, is that you get the chance to do it how you want to do it.
Exactly. It's not a right to be happy. You've got the right to pursue it.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? You have the opportunity here to be able to pursue happiness, or you can be miserable, whichever one you want to do.
And that's a choice too. And if that's your type of happiness, then hey, go for it.
Yeah,
right?
I'm all about freedom of choice. I think we ought to have the freedom to choose. And I wholeheartedly agree with what you said on that last one. Leave me alone. Not you, listeners. I love you, and I want you to. I still want you to be here. Lindsay, don't leave me alone either. I enjoy this conversation.
No, I won't leave you.
But as far as the political side goes, in all seriousness, as long as I've got those things, I'm good. Tell me about the Brandon Act.
Okay, the Brandon Act. Brandon Caserta killed himself a couple of years ago, very brutally. I'm not going to go into that. The details. He killed himself. He was under toxic leadership in his Navy unit. And the Brandon Act is basically access to mental health care in the military without kind of having to go through your chain of command. You would say the Brandon Act, and then you would automatically be able to seek mental health care like immediately. It wouldn't be an afterthought. The thinking being that had Brandon been able to seek mental health care or thought that there was access to it without getting repercussions from his command, that it would have helped the situation. And I totally agree with that. So the bill is looking at easier access to mental health care. And I think also the bill obviously doesn't state this because you can't change culture. It's something that changes over time, but it's sort of like mandating down. Congress is, because Congress comes in when they think the culture is not going to change and they mandate things. And so it's a start where Congress is saying, hey, you guys need to focus on this. I mean, we have the suicides, not only in the veteran community, but inside the military active duty. It's a solid bill. Seth Moulton and John Kelly in the Senate. Seth Moulton's in the House. They are bill sponsors. It was reintroduced 2 weeks ago. Yeah, it's a great piece of legislation. I've been talking to the senator offices about it because it did pass the House last time. So we're more focusing on the Senate this time. There's still some weariness on it. There's also some apprehension, I think, about how the practicalities of how it would work out, actually on the ground. Because again, when Congress mandates things, they don't always know the second and third order effects that it will have in like an everyday unit, Army unit or military unit. Yeah, but I think it's a great start. And I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes. There is a little bit of competition with the Military Improvement Act, which would be recently combined with the Ian Vanessa-Guillen bill, which would be taking sexual assault out of military hands and placing it into a civilian hands for prosecution and investigation. That bill is competing with it, but we'll kind of see at the end of the day. NDA is going on right now, or it will be, and we'll see how it all levels out at the end of the day.
So the Brandon Act basically adjusts how military personnel can receive mental health help. What is the process now for a soldier to be able to receive help and treatment and everything versus what the Brandon Act is trying to simplify?
So the main difference would be now you would go to your first line supervisor or your commander. You would get command referred or you would self-refer. It's kind of a lengthy process. It can take days to get you an actual appointment. This would sort of expedite that so that you could get it sooner. And you also wouldn't necessarily have, and I'm not a big fan of taking things out of command hands, but I think this is an emergency blanket we're throwing on the issue right now. I think the bill can be refined later. But yeah, it would just be more immediate care and you wouldn't necessarily have to explain why you wanted to seek mental health. You would just be able to do it. And then maybe later on, you would talk to your leadership about why you did it. And it also places, I think it also gives the soldier the power, with mental health issues. If the person isn't willing to put in the work on themselves, then you can't do it for them. And I think it places a little bit of power back in the hands of the soldier to be proactive in their mental health. Did that answer the question? I would think just expediting it would be the main difference.
Is part of the holdup, and I don't know how any other way to ask this question, but is part of the holdup actually the worry about putting some of the power back into the soldiers' hands? And here's why I ask this. I'm all for military personnel. I thoroughly believe that mental health is a very important thing for our military personnel. I'm throwing that disclosure out there for anybody who's like, why did he say that? Here's why I'm saying that. To a certain degree, as my dad used to teach me, you got to look at things from all four sides. Is part of the worry about putting some of that power back in the soldiers' hands, because you're always going to have some of those that are like, hey, this is a loophole. I can say this, I can get out of doing this, I can get out of doing that. You see where I'm coming from. Are they worried about how they're going to say, well, now that I have this opportunity, I can go and do this, and it might be able to get me discharged before I want to be, or before my contract's up? Or you see where I'm going with this?
Yeah, definitely. And I even had a couple offices, I won't mention their names, the staffers talked to me about that same concern today. Yeah, you're always going to have that. And I think that also is like the stigma too a lot on active duty is if, oh, you got a mental health problem, that means you want to get out of work. Or that means, yeah, maybe you want to get out of your military contract early. I think you're always going to have that. And then it also will cause a little bit of like loss of command and control with the commanders. And Republicans are huge on the armed service committees on both House and Senate, are huge on command control. And I think that they're worried that they will lose a little bit of that and it will go to the soldiers. So yeah, you're always going to have the concern that it's abused and it's not used correctly. So yeah, I think that's a huge concern. And I think legislators feel that there are better answers. And I haven't seen anything better proposed than this, but I think that they feel that there are better ways to go about handling this.
Just from what I've read and, what I've heard from you on your show, it's the best piece of legislation out there. And it's just like with the Cannabis Act that was just passed here recently in Alabama. It's a good start.
You have to start somewhere.
Yes.
And, there will be second and third order effects, as in like, will mental health now be able to handle this? Because I would assume there will be an influx of mental health or behavioral health centers are already limited to some degree on funding. So there will be like, are we able to actually like support this legislation or, as far as receiving this care? And then there's also other things, when a soldier has a mental health issue, there's always like, with like security clearances, you put a DROG in, or they can't carry a weapon sometimes, or they become undeployable. And I think what will happen eventually is that the military will have to take a deep look at like, if you're going to encourage people to seek mental health, there can't be all these negative repercussions. And this is minus just the climate that does not accept it, the culture that does not accept the mental health, you seeking mental health is okay. So that's minus that. These are just all the actual like steps you have to go through as a commander. So they think they'll have to, if they're going to promote mental health care and they're going to be serious about it, then they're going to have to take a look at the repercussions. And do they continue to do that? Because you're not going to be able to do both.
One thing about mental health care that has always worried me, especially with my background as being a corrections officer, all the prescription medication that they always prescribe. And a lot of that prescription medication has worse side effects to it than what you're dealing with. For as intelligent as we are, the brain is still one of those mysteries. We still don't have a full grasp on how it works and how different things affect it. Some of those pills don't do nothing but just suppress you. You know what I'm saying? To me, some of those medications, and I've said this in a previous podcast, they only treat the symptoms. They don't treat the root of the problem. That was one thing that I saw just on the local level here at the county jail state. Back several years ago, you started seeing all the funding and everything go away from some of these mental health places. Where did they go? They went to the county jail. That's not mental health care at all. Because while I was there, I wasn't trained.
No, you throw them in solitary confinement, right?
Right. And studies have shown that in most cases on that, whenever somebody has mental health issues and they're left by themselves for extended periods of time, makes it worse. Humans aren't supposed to be alone. Simple fact. We do better whenever we are around people. You can hear people that are by themselves all the time, especially elderlies. I seen it firsthand with my late grandmother. Whenever she'd be on the phone or whatever, as the conversation would go, you would hear her speech clear up. Her mind would get sharper. True story. She'd be a little slurred, but then as you got the conversation going, it was like she had just woke up, or like you had woke up or whatever. How you're not that sharp as soon as you wake up, but as you start to get awake or whatever, you just kind of perk up a little bit. Same principle. I've seen that with inmates and everything in solitary. Half of them act out just to get attention.
Yeah, like I always tell people, like if you ever meet a soldier or a veteran who's on gabapentin and drinking, run. Because when you not only give this cocktail to them, then they drink on it, you become absolutely insane. And just to agree with what you're saying, like I was also guilty of getting the dose of pills from the VA, and those were some horrible years, I will tell you. Like those were years where I didn't even know who I was anymore. I was so medicated. But now I just and I'm by no means, to our listeners, am I saying get off your meds? Like that is not what I'm saying.
And that's not what I'm saying either.
Yeah. But what I am saying,
stay on them.
Yeah, but what I'm saying for myself is that I found that working out, being around people, like you just said, exercising, having a support group, eating correctly, sleeping, those things can be so much more for me, they were so much more beneficial. And right. I hope eventually, it goes also back to what you're talking about with cannabis. I mean, cannabis for veterans of PTSD is so much better than gabapentin Ambien and like lithium and like everything they put you on. I mean, you don't even know who you are sometimes on this medication. So you saw in the prison systems, it just it doesn't translate well and it doesn't solve the problem.
I've heard horror stories about people being on Ambien for prolonged periods of time, how they would go a day or two and then suddenly just come out of it not knowing who they are or where they are or what they've done. They've literally been a zombie. That scares me. I'm sorry, but that scares me. The last thing that I ever want to lose in this world is my mind.
Well, and a lot of those medications, they say you can't drive on them. If you can't drive on them, I'm like, what can you do?
Right.
Like, if you can't drive on them, then why are you taking them? I mean, but to your point, though, this is just a fun fact. I was just having a conversation with someone from the VA, and they were telling me, I thought this was very interesting. They were telling me that those drugs are only tested on men because it's really hard to test them on women because women have so many hormones and chemicals and like their different periods through the month and things. And so it's hard to get a group of women to test medication on. So a lot of times, we were talking about a case I was working on, a lot of times women will take these pills, but they were only tested on men. So women become incredibly over medicated because the studies have not been done to show what effects that these medications can have on women. And I was like, wow, like that's really something to think about.
Like I said, the medication has always scared me. I'm not trying to sound like a pansy or anything, but there's got to be, the symptoms are sometimes worse than the problems. I just don't like taking pills. I don't want to get so dependent on a pill that I can't function, if that makes any sense.
No, completely. The clarity of the brain is so important. And you can't deal with your issues if you can't think clearly. So
half the time I can't think clearly now.
And you don't want to be an Ambien. I've heard stories where people have sex and get pregnant and they're like, whoa, why am I pregnant? And like the husband's like, well, because we've been having sex for like the last like 3 months and like what? Oh, you've been taking your Ambien. Or like just getting up in the middle of the night and eating like the whole refrigerator and just not remembering. I mean, Ambien is a whole different story, but it has its crazy side to it.
That would mess me up because both of those two activities that you just talked about, I'm a big fan of.
Yeah, so there you go. Let's talk about how we met.
Well, let's talk about it.
So we met over Steve Moon.
Yes, we did. Shout out to you, Steve, if you're listening to this. You brought two podcasters together.
Do you want to? Yeah, you talk about Steve Moon because he's a great guy. Yeah.
Yes, he is. We were privileged I was privileged to have Steve Moon here on the porch. And as everybody that's listening to this ought to know by now, Porch Matters is also on Instagram as well as Facebook and Twitter. They even got a TikTok up. No, I am not doing any crazy dances yet. The only thing I'm posting is clips and everything from the show. But I posted everything on Instagram, and Miss Lindsey reached out and said, ask me some questions about Mr. Moon because she was going to have him on her podcast as well. So thank you, Steve. I appreciate that.
Yeah, so Steve has a film called In the Fight, right? And you saw it. I saw it.
Out of the Fight. Film. Yes, ma'am.
Or I'm sorry, Out of the Fight. Yeah.
You see who got it right, Steve. You see who got it right.
Well, I was thinking In the Hunt because that's one of my favorite podcasts. And so that I follow. So I was like, In the Hunt, In the Fight. Yeah. But yeah, it's a great film. And Steve was animated and absolutely, you know, you have good podcast guests, then you have the other podcast guests.
Yes.
So yeah.
Steve was great. I'm going to have to get him back on the porch here pretty soon. We might have to interview him at the same time.
Yeah, right. He's always up for a good interview, I feel like, though.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think so, too. So what have you got as far as future plans and everything goes for Carry On Podcast?
Well, I'm actually about to take a little self-care time here at the end of July, so I'm kind of staffing them up a little bit. We have Mr. Watkins, Albert Watkins tomorrow, lawyer for the QAnon Shaman, and then I'm working on Austin Stump case. John is the father. He committed suicide. We think it was hazing. We're just telling the story over and over again from everybody that wants to talk about it, his family, his sister, and we're just kind of hoping somebody comes forward about it. it's a tragic story, but is one of those cases where I think if we just talk about it and we put it out there enough times, that there may be somebody comes forward and says, "Hey, yeah, this was a hazing death in the Ranger Battalion," and I don't know what's going to happen with it, but it's an interesting case, and I'm sure you get this as well. You just sort of like develop these strong relationships with your guests, especially when you do like prolonged stories, and you just really start to care.
Lindsey, I appreciate you coming onto the porch. Would you please tell the listeners where they can find you on social media?
So I am Carry On Podcast on Facebook. I have 2 accounts. One's usually blocked by Facebook, and so you can hit the other one up when that one's not blocked. I'm on Instagram. Same thing, Carry On Podcast, and you can just Google me. Yeah, I don't have TikTok yet, so I'm a little jealous.
You'll get there.
I just don't. I feel like I need to hire like a millennial to like run my TikTok account.
I'll be honest. I don't know what I'm doing. I just post podcast stuff. And my knees have gotten too bad to dance, so everybody's safe for that one.
I feel like you should really get a dance video out there though. At some point, it might liven it up, for your TikTok. I don't know what's going on your TikTok account, but I know that I don't have one, so you're still a step ahead of me.
Well, if I get some liquor in me, that dance video would go viral, but we're not going to go there just yet. I appreciate you coming on to the show, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Big thanks to Lindsey Rowland for coming on the porch. Don't be surprised if you see her back on the porch here pretty soon. There's a lot to talk about with her, and we barely scratched the surface. Find Carry On Podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. Leave her a review and tell her that you heard her on Porch Matters. If you are new to the show and like what you hear, hit that like, subscribe, or follow button and download the episodes in our archives. If this show has been a positive addition to your life, please rate the show and leave a review. Won't take you but a minute, and it really would help the show. Find us on social media by typing Porch Matters Podcast in the search bar. Word of mouth is still the best way of sharing. Please pick your favorite episode and share it with at least one person this week. There are a lot of people out there that have never heard of a podcast before. I really would appreciate it. And I'll see you next time right here on Porch Matters.